Our keynote speaker today, I'm sure all of you know, Irene Pritzker, but the most important thing that most of you don't know is that she became a grandmother. Mazel tov. So Irene, would you come forward and tell us about what you're doing in the impact space to inspire others to follow your path? Maybe not being a grandmother, but also to invest money.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you. It is true, I just became a grandmother. I could tell you all about that if you prefer, but I better do what I was asked to do in the first place. I think that really talking about impact investing as it has related to me really stems from the formation of a foundation. Previous to the foundation being formed in 2008, I had been running our own family office, investing the assets of myself and my 2 children. And we had always done this. I always felt like I was really custodian of the children's money, and that one day they would make decisions about how they wanted to invest it. So what I did was really engage a very fine group of wealth advisors, and we were investing in very traditional, flexible strategies, diversified portfolio, and we were doing very well. Well, when the children eventually grew up and they took over their own portfolios, they had a much greater sense of what actually was happening, what were the companies that the money was being invested in. And at the same time, my daughter and I co-founded a foundation. And we chose to make the foundation a corporation for a variety of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons was that we would now have the flexibility to do what we wanted. We would not be constrained by boards of trustees. All I have to do is have a meeting with me, because I am the person, the only decision maker in that foundation. So if I want to do something and I want to use philanthropic dollars to take risk, I can do it. And that led me into looking at what are we going to fund? And I started to think about philanthropy in a much more global sense. And I thought, you know, what is it that aid has really ever done? Has any country ever become prosperous through aid? No, they haven't. We've spent trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars funding global education, but half the world is still illiterate. There are still the estimates, and I don't know where, having worked in the field, I have no idea where some of these statistics come from, but they're for sure not right, and I don't know whether they're overstated or understated, but they're definitely wrong. And so I started to get very interested, inspired by an academic, James Tooley, who had written extensively and won awards for his observations of the fact that despite all of the aid that has gone into global education, the majority of the world's poor are trying to educate themselves in these informal, privately owned schools that somebody with a bit of education in a village will begin. And the parents will take their very limited resources and pay very small amount of money to the owners of these schools to try and get a better education for their children, because the public education systems in the developing world are not doing their job. And the multilaterals, the UN, all of the big industrialized nations foundations fund governments. That's the policy. You do not fund private initiatives, you fund governments, or you fund NGOs that are implementing programs in government schools. So for all the money that USAID gives away, it's very political. There really is not much demand for any accountability. So what I decided to do was let's look at these schools and see how they function. And what I discovered is that because they're so disenfranchised and so marginalized and so unrecognized, they have absolutely no possible chance of ever getting access to capital. which means that the school really can't grow. So the government isn't giving them assistance, the funders aren't giving them assistance, and they don't have any proper teaching and learning materials because they can't afford trained teachers. So I thought, I wonder what it would be like if you gave a loan to such a school. Now, they don't have any collateral. Sometimes they're just a bunch of kids sitting under a tree. And so I found an excellent microfinance partner in Ghana, the largest microfinance organization called Sinapiaba Trust, with a wonderful reputation and very deeply committed to transformative programming. So they were just thrilled to take this on as long as I paid for it. So, of course, I said, okay, let me do this. Let me look at this as a grant, as a risk capital to invest in creating a program that hopefully will become scalable and replicable and sustainable. Because if we can do that, and we can show a profit for the microfinance institution, not just in terms of financial returns, but in social credit within these communities, then we have something that we might be able to turn into a global model. Well, I went out to find out who else has done this sort of thing, and I discovered that actually nobody had. We were going to be the very first people in the whole world, despite enormous amounts of research and discussions with USAID and DFID in London and UN agencies. No, nobody will do such a thing. People will invest in chain school models because they can take an equity stake. But no financial institution had any information. There's no track record that the financial institution could actually profit from doing such a program. So we set out, and over 3 years we piloted this with 105 schools, with 27,000 children in an initial enrollment. We brought them in 3 tranches, because we didn't know what we were doing, so we knew that we were going to mess up and we would have to fix things. But ultimately, at the end of the pilot, this is what we had. We had 9 days of training. In the morning, they had financial literacy, and in the afternoon, they had school management. And each was 1 day a week apart. And we discovered so much from doing this. We discovered, first of all, that all of these individual owners who previously had not known one another started to form a network, which started to bring pressure on the local officials and the government because they started to learn how to lobby, and we taught them how to do that. We also discovered that if we had the loan officers themselves teaching the courses, that they would then know whether or not an entrepreneur, a school owner, would probably be able to manage the loan. So we took them right through up to the point of writing a simple business plan. Every week they had tests, they had homework, they had this, they had that. They were able to apply for loans, and we found that we have had an over 90% repayment of the loans. Many of the school owners are on their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th loan cycles. And by the end, the program is actively growing, actively scaling. The government likes us because we're helping them track where these schools are. And they know they're not reaching all of the children. So we've got a nice partnership with the government. We've got a very profitable program for the microfinance institution. And we are really, truly creating a program that is able to be replicated, and we're building a track record that shows a financial institution that actually it's possible to invest in a debt portfolio and do very well. So, of course, we continue as by June 2016, we should have 580 schools with over 150,000 children that previously didn't have any access to any type of quality education. So if you look at that, that was a keystone program of our foundation. It was very hard work creating it. You really had to get down and dirty into the trenches. You had a huge learning curve, lots of trips to Ghana. And I think that also taught us, well, we're not going to give grants in this foundation unless that grant is going to leverage into much more money and much greater impact. And that's the way we treat everything we do, whether I'm giving research grants to medical scientists who are able to use that money in a way that helps them get much bigger grants from NIH or NCI. Cancer research, we look always at only investing our philanthropic dollars in something that can scale and grow. And we're doing pretty well. We've only been around since 2008, and we really are seeing, as a result of that very firm, disciplined approach, we're seeing some programs that are developing women's health in Ethiopia, for example. We're seeing things that are really getting to become very big programs just because we have that very tough love attitude at the beginning. So now, as we're sort of looking at this leads me into thinking, well, what about how we're investing the money in the foundation? You know, we're making all this money, but is this the Warren Buffett idea? Make it any way you want and then give it all away? Or can we combine the two things? And then, of course, you know, there's always a lot of discussion about the millennials. Well, my children are the millennials. And they grow up in a whole different culture. And their ideas about wanting to have much more social impact in the world is really what is driving, I think, an enormous amount of the growth in impact investing. Everything in the end is consumer driven. And when you start getting pressure on companies, when social media starts to do its work, when we start learning about unfair labor practices, when we start learning about indentured labor, we start seeing what's happening on the cocoa farms, what's happening in China and in India, which companies are utilizing the services of people that have very unfair labor practices. You start to see a momentum build. And what I have seen now, what I feel, you know, somebody mentioned me the other day, impact investing has gone from cute to charismatic to commercial, which I think is actually a very apt description. And I think what's happening is the pyramid is turning upside down. We are not any longer chipping away at the brick wall. The brick wall has a huge hole in it at this point. And until the main banks and investment houses get it, and until the US regulators stop making it so difficult for impact products to be registered in this country, we are going to lose a huge market share to the boutique firms that are coming in, to all of the accelerators and incubators that are showcasing investable opportunities which require seed funding. The venture capitalists are all hopping on board. The foundations are getting more and more exposure. The boards of the of the big main foundations are old, and they are being replaced by much younger, more innovative thinking heads, the corporate heads and the board members themselves. And this is growing at such an exponential rate, I can't even begin to tell you how quickly things are changing. I mean, it is not we're just not chipping away. It is really turning upside down, and I am seeing this everywhere. We are now in our foundation over 80% pure mission aligned, with an additional portion of money set aside for investing in limited partnership funds and direct investments. And once again, this is where we can do this through the program-related investment mechanism or a mission-related investment mechanism. It becomes very much easier for a foundation to take their philanthropic dollars and to see it absolutely as pure risk capital seed investment, to be able to invest in programming that will have a much greater impact than just writing checks for aid. One thing I will say, which may be of interest to the Kellogg and Booth people that are here, is as this is happening, you understand all these deals and deal structures are put together by lawyers. And we don't have any lawyers that really know what they're doing in this field. So you guys there in business school, and any of you doing law degrees, get into it, because we desperately need you in this space. And that's something that has been seriously overlooked as the business schools are talking more about impact investing and teaching classes on it. The law schools need to start teaching about how international deal structures actually can work. I don't know, I had a few figures, but I think that Robert and everybody really talked about them, just basically the enormous movement of wealth from the baby boomers into the younger generation. They say now that, this is from Accenture, that SRI, socially responsible investing assets, now account for more than 1 out of every $6 under professional management in the United States. And in the last 2 years alone, US-based assets adhering to these strategies have grown 76%. Totaling over 6.5 trillion in assets under management. There's just, I mean, what we are really seeing is that what was originally a grassroots effort is now absolutely part of the mainstream mentality of and philosophy of investing. And I've often been asked to speak to some of the big banks because I've complained about the fact that there has been much greater leadership in Europe and other parts of the world in impact investing than in the US, and because there has been a resistance amongst the corporate heads of some of the big banks in New York. And I've definitely seen some alarm and shift, particularly as they are realizing that they are losing their assets, they're losing their market share. So I feel that, you know, there are probably many more people like me that have taken this journey, and I think that just talking to you all as wealth advisors or money managers, I think that the emergence, the rapid emergence of all these boutique firms and the transfer of wealth into them is really the writing on the wall. And I don't think that we can think that socially sustainable, socially responsible investing is not going to actually be the leader going forward. So, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Are there any questions? We have Juan, I think he has a microphone. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and Juan will come to you.
Go ahead, Johnny.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. I work a lot in Ghana, and there were several core messages that came out that were really important. the time on the ground, building trust, building relationships. That sustainability is often missed in the conversation, just as law is, about building deals. So I'd like to ask a question about how long did it take and why was that important for you to really be in Ghana a lot to create and partner? So what does that really look like? How long did it take? And how important is it in developing your investment portfolio?
Well, when we started the program in Ghana, you know, I got there, but I happened to be on a trip that was sponsored by Opportunity International because they were going to develop a program in educational finance. And I had become interested in going on that trip because I had heard James Tooley, the academic I referred to, who has written a lot about this sector. And so I went with Opportunity International, and when I got there, I discovered that they were going to give loans to much bigger schools. They weren't going to be giving loans to the sorts of schools that James Tooley was talking about. But one of the members of Opportunity International Network was Sinapiaba Trust. And they, because they were an NGO microfinance organization at that time, they were a trust, they would be able to engage in some activities in developing a program that a regulated bank would not be able to do. And the Opportunity International banks were regulated financial institutions. So that's how I got initially hooked up with Sinapiaba Trust. And so, you know, this now meant a lot of trips to Ghana. Let's do our market research. That meant getting in four-wheel drive vehicles and driving all over the place and saying to people, is there a school anywhere around here? Or, you know, is there anything? And then they'd say, oh yes, just down the road. And we discovered in Ghana that just down the road could be 10 kilometers that you'd just been walking. So we learned, so you start learning right there what, you know, when they say just down the road, it's not the same as when we say just down the road. And so you start to learn as you're talking. If you don't go and you don't talk to the owners of the school, and you don't talk to the parents, and you don't see the enthusiasm on the faces of the children, and the pride with which they are attending some tumble-down shack of a building in their little school uniforms, all excited about being in school, if you don't actually hear that yourself, if you don't hear and see the hope expressed in the parents' eyes, and you don't go and talk to the Ghana Education Services and the government and hear what they have to say about their frustration about these schools, you don't understand anything about the culture. And so if you don't understand the culture, how can you possibly realistically create anything that is going to work? So it's a huge learning curve, and Ghanaians are very polite people, and they very often, they're used to me now. I'm Australian, we are on the direct side, and now they have lost their trepidation about telling me just exactly like how it is. But it took quite a long time before they felt comfortable enough with me to do that. And so, you know, you keep hitting brick walls all the time because they weren't explaining how something really worked in that country. And I think that if you talk to people that develop programs, that's one of the big problems that we have in the United Nations. A lot of the people, like I was in the UNESCO office in Ghana, the head of UNESCO in Ghana had never seen a school until we flew him up to a rural area to show him what one of these schools looked like. And we found this again and again and again. These people, USAID people, they sit in their offices in the capital. They don't get out and get down and dirty. And that's why so many of our aid money is completely useless. But that's a whole other topic. But to answer your question, it takes that amount of work and trips and dedication and perseverance to be able to successfully develop something.
Hi, Michael Smolin from .sub. I love what you're doing. Couple questions. What is the nationality of your senior management team in Ghana? And could you give an example at the school level of how much money you're talking about in a loan? In other words, is that $500, $100, $4,000? And you said that they're highly profitable. So at the school level, and you said you're now having, I made a note, 580 schools with 150,000 students. What does a business model look like in a school that is a couple of years old that is working? And then the last question is the language. How are you dealing with the language issues in Ghana?
Okay, so the top management people in Ghana are all Ghanaian. We don't have any white faces running this program at all. The white faces are back in Chicago. Here's how this really worked well. We were able to help them develop the management skills to run this kind of a program. They are able to run it because they're Ghanaian. And they understand the people that they're working with. When you ask about the loans, we crafted several carefully structured loan products. That's very much related to some of the regulatory requirements in Ghana. For instance, a school to be properly registered must own the land it sits on. So we developed a loan product to buy land. We developed a loan product to buy a school bus. We developed working capital loans so that they would be able to pay their teachers on time. We developed school fee loans. And so we've developed a variety of products which, based on us going out, I did 40 different day-long interviews in market research with school owners in 4 different regions of Ghana, asking questions which helped us know what the program should look like when we developed it. The language in Ghana is English, the official language. When you get into the rural area, and incidentally, despite a lot of educational research to the contrary, these parents very often choose to send the children to these private schools because they teach them from the beginning in English. Now, actually, that is not the best thing to do, as most educational experts will tell you, but that's the market demand. And if that's the market demand, that's what those schools are going to do. In the rural areas, we often would need a translator from the loan officer. All loan officers speak fluent English. And so there are different dialects in Ghana, not a lot of them, but sometimes we would need to have, when we were actually speaking directly to a school owner or a parent, we would need to have the loan officer interpret for us.
Thanks. Thank you for a really, really inspiring presentation. I'm Donna Katzen, and I work with Shared Interest. We guarantee loans for emerging businesses and farms in Southern Africa. My question is on the scaling side. Once these schools have established themselves, have been able to borrow from the MFIs, what is the next step? Because to scale, there will need to be additional capital that may or may not be met by the impact investing world as it currently exists. Are there plans or connections with the larger commercial lenders in the country, banks and so forth, to help these schools graduate to loans that they can get on their own so that the impact capital can be used to go start others?
Well, what's happening with Sinapiaba Trust, which incidentally also just got a savings and loan designation, is that the school owners, they are once they've been through the course and they've applied for and repaid their first loan, they're lending, borrowing on themselves, and they're building up a credit record. So they are able to go out and to seek, and it's particularly as the infrastructure of the school improves and the enrollment increases and they're better managing their schools, they're positioned to go out and be able to seek additional capital. Now, one of the reasons that we try hard to keep them at Sanapiaba Trust, or one of the reasons they try hard to stay at Sanapiaba Trust, is because we are offering those schools below market rates of interest rates. So in Ghana, the microfinance interest rate for a typical microfinance loan is somewhere between 36 and 42%. We are lending at 25%. Now, one of the ways that we are able to do that is because I decided, I tried to see, I went out to shop to see if I could get anybody to lend into the loan portfolio. No. Nobody wants to lend into the loan portfolio because they don't want to assume the currency risk. So if you're going to have to pay to hedge the currency risk, now it's taken the loan completely out of the realm of these poor school owners. So this is one of the things that I did, of course, you know, me being able to have my own meeting with me. I decided to invest $1 million into the loan portfolio. It's a 3-year loan at 12%. And it's a ridiculously risky thing to do because when we started this program, one Ghanaian CD was worth $1 US. Right when we did this loan, the promissory note says that they will have to pay us back 3.63 million CDs when they repay the loan. That's how much the Ghanaian CD is valued. So at the time we made the loan, $1 US, it took 3.63 CDs to buy $1 US. Well, people would look at us and say, you're nuts. Well, you know what? They've had a very bad administration. The underlying fundamental Ghanas are bad. The country has been fiscally mismanaged. The IFC is stepping in, the IMF, I should say, is stepping in to try and sort them out. And we don't have to repatriate that money until we're good and ready. And when we do, if they decide not to roll that into the principal, but to actually pay it out, we're going to be able to set it in a bank account at a term deposit of 26%. So I just do not think that we can lose. But nobody else actually thinks that I'm right. But on the other hand, it's my $1 million, and if I want to take 20 years before I bring it back, and it's been getting interest at 26%, I've decided I may not be very good at math and may never graduate with an MBA, but I decided to take the risk anyway.
Hi, my name is Philip Carey. I come from the wealth management background myself. And so I'm sort of curious, what was your process with your investment managers, either with your personal wealth or within the management of the foundation's assets? You made reference to the fact that it's more boutique-y. You need to use boutiques in this area, that the big banks have not started going in that direction. So I'm just curious about your experience. Did you have to fire your old managers and find new ones? Did you have to educate your existing managers to make that transition, or were they ready for you?
They weren't ready for us. There was bullying that went on, and there was an incredible willingness to listen to us because the assets under management were fairly considerable collectively. And in the beginning, the attitude of our advisors was this attitude that has been pervasive until, you know, the last 7 or 8 years, that really, how much are you willing to give up in terms of financial return to do this. And we said nothing. We're not willing to give up anything, thank you very much. And they, I have to say, they stepped up to the plate. They went out, they went off platform with the big corporate platform. They did a lot of things at their own expense. It was because of the fantastic flexibility of our wealth advisors and their willingness to jump into this with us that we were able to not have to replace. What did happen was our wealth advisors replaced managers. They are the ones that went out to find the impact managers. They have been the ones that, and then of course, because we would go to all these accelerators and incubators for the small companies, entrepreneurs that are beginning to look, they have fledgling ideas and they're looking for venture capital money, seed capital investment. We would learn a huge amount about the existence of many impact funds, some of which are open to US investors and some of which are actually US funds. And then we would tell our advisors about it, and then they would go out and interview them. And really what has happened as a result of that is that they themselves have become leaders in this space and are quoted and interviewed in Barron's and Wall Street Journal and so forth. And if anybody wants to know who they are, you can ask me privately later. Right.
Thank you very, very much. If you could